Happy Tuesday, everyone. We are back. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. And for our American friends, I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day long weekend as well. I hope your weather was good for you. Today we are talking about sugar. So we know that sugar is a big deal. It is on a lot of people's minds in terms of getting it out of their diet and how it affects your health. So we're going to talk today all about sugar and how that affects our arthritis and our autoimmune conditions. We're going to go into a little bit of the science, but not too crazy. Just the basics that you need to know. But before we get started, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are. I am Jessica Melnick. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist, the founder of the Anti-Arthritis Method, and the host of the Happy Joints Arthritis Solutions Group. And I help people with various forms of arthritis get back to living their lives the way they want to, not the way that they have to. And Casey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Casey Kephart. I'm a functional medicine nutritionist. I am the founder of the Feel Good Formula. I help women with all different types of autoimmune diseases get back to the activities that you love to do and trash your symptoms and regain energy so you can check off those bucket list items again. And I reside in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the sun always shines.
Amazing. So, like I said, today we are talking about sugar because sugar can really contribute to our autoimmune disease symptoms, so arthritis or other autoimmune conditions, and it also causes systemic inflammation. So, there's going to be some types of sugar that may surprise you. So, there's different foods that we can eat that break down the sugar in the body. So we also need to be aware of those. So when we're saying sugar, we don't just mean the bag of white sugar that you get, at least what I do at Christmas time, where I'm making all sorts of really unhealthy treats that make us all feel terrible, but it's tradition. And so I use that regular good old white sugar. And there's also the brown sugar. So anything of that's all refined sources of sugar, but there's also other forms of sugar that maybe we're not quite aware of. So we're going to list a few of those things and we're going to kind of explain a little bit more about what sugar does to the body. So maybe
Jessica, I
yes.
want to say one thing. So you reminded me when you said white refined sugar. As a kid, my grandma used to have those little sugar cubes in the little petri dish, not petri dish, but a little dish on a
Yes.
credenza, and I would just sneak those all day long and just eat those. And on top of the oatmeal I had every morning with this large scoop of brown sugar, and it would just be dark brown there, and I would just eat it every day. So it
Yeah.
like brings back these memories of a kid.
Right? Oh my goodness. And when you say that too about the oatmeal with the brown sugar on top, when I was a kid, we did have box cereals, but we weren't allowed to have the really sugary cereals
Mm,
as like on the regular. We have those as like a special treat once in a while. But I remember my parents would buy like Shreddies or Cheerios or shredded wheat as like the healthy
right.
cereal with
The
low
Raisin
sugar.
Bran.
But then we were allowed to sprinkle some brown sugar on top of it, because it tastes terrible otherwise.
Oh my God, the shredded wheat was my favorite. I mean, not until more teenager-ish, but it's all filled with sugar, right? The cereals, and it's so funny that you just added sugar on top of the sugar, basically.
Yes, yes.
If
Oh,
anybody,
memories.
right? If anybody else has more stories like we're sharing right now, please put them below because now that we have a mind that's knowledgeable about sugar and what it can do to affect you, it's funny to look back on these stories and be like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking?
Oh,
Or
and
what were my parents thinking?
some of the things that we ate, oh, wow.
I know. Pop Tarts. Oh my gosh. I don't know how I functioned every day on Pop Tarts or oatmeal in the morning with brown sugar or sugar cubes. I don't
Oh,
know.
I hear you. I just think that maybe as when we're kids, we're just more resilient until it just catches up to us.
With our autoimmune disease. Probably not a good contributing factor to our autoimmune disease.
Right? Oh my goodness. Crazy. But yes, besides things like all these box cereals that we ate, some of the
Hmm.
sources of sugars that may totally surprise you. or maybe not, maybe this is old news, but alcohol. So, all forms of alcohol. Alcohol is another form of sugar. So, things like, pure spirits, beer, wine, etc., all the things. Even like just like hard alcohol, like a shot of vodka,
Mm-hmm.
form of sugar.
Yeah.
Fruit and other root vegetables. So, of course, fruit and root vegetables are good for us, but we also don't want to make that our only source of fruit and
Mm-hmm.
vegetables. So, when I say root vegetables, I'm thinking like beets, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, like all those kind of like tubers and things,
Mm-hmm.
cassava root, yucca. There's lots and lots. Everyone taro, everybody, different cultures depending on where you live in the world and where they grow. There's a wide variety. So although these things can be really good for us in their whole forms, we also don't want to overdo it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Having too much protein or fat as well. So if you're eating like too much meat or other forms of protein, or even more fat than your body needs, so this is for people who are interested in keto. If you actually are in ketosis, which means that your body is burning stored fat for
Mm-hmm.
fuel because you were intaking such a low amount of carbohydrates, your body is going to use that stored fuel. But let's say you're eating keto, but you're still eating too many calories, your body can actually produce carbohydrates from the protein and fat. So I don't,
Mm-hmm.
Casey, you maybe know a little bit more about how that works than I do, but our body's first source of fuel and our brain's first source of fuel is always carbs. And so our body is always looking for ways to make carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that process is just called gluconeogenesis. So the body is always going to take the glucose form first for energy and for functioning of the body. So that would be your carbohydrates first, whether that comes from the root vegetables, the fruit, the sugar cubes, the brown sugar, whatever you're eating. The body is always going to use that first for energy, brain functioning, and store that as fat if it needs to. Put that in your adipose tissue. But if you're not getting that, and like Jessica said, with the keto diet, or we're just going low carb, it's going to take that carbohydrates to get that carbohydrate source from the fat and protein if you're eating too much of it, and it's
Mhm.
going to break that down. So, that's as far as I think I'm going to go with the science of it. We just need to know
Yeah.
that fat and protein can reduce down to sugar too, and that's called gluconeogenesis.
Yeah. Amazing.
Mhm.
Other sources of sugar that may surprise you or may not. Things like carbohydrate heavy foods, pancakes, toasts, cakes, cookies, desserts. All the gluten in the grains, which is what pancakes and toasts and cakes and cookies and desserts are typically made from. So all of those things, even though you're not maybe eating a straight sugar cube like Casey used to do, but it's turning into that in the body.
Right. And some things we just don't realize that it's sugar because it doesn't come in that sugar form, like alcohol. Often it says 0 calories, or it's keto, but in the body it is forming into glucose to use as fast energy. So just be cognizant of that. And if you are feeling some symptoms that we'll go through later, it may be because of those sources that we're really not familiar with, or you're eating too much fat and protein. But having the reason we're talking about this is because sugar equals inflammation, right? I think we all grasp that idea. It's not particularly good for us, but in an autoimmune disease, or in a body that is not particularly healthy, it causes damage and inflammation, and things like candida, yeast overgrowth, UTIs, bacterial infections, yeast infections. can be stored as fat in your adipose tissue, which equals inflammation. Fat is inflammation in the body. I mean, to a certain extent, bad fat is inflammation in the body. We all need fat covering our organs because that is healthy. We need that as protection. But any excess fat is inflammation. So the way that we can reduce this inflammation, it's kind of low hanging fruit if you think about it, is reducing these unnecessary sugar sources that we're eating to help the bacteria thrive in our body, to use for us, not against us, to stop getting those UTIs, to stop getting that candida overgrowth, to stop the yeast infections. And this goes a lot for the women that are listening to this, but men can also have these issues too. It's just more in a rarer form, I would say.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jessica.
I just wanted to add about the for men and yeast, like systemic yeast infections and candida. You're looking at more like jock itch and also athlete's foot. That is
Mm-hmm.
also a form of yeast and like fungus overgrowth.
Yeah, definitely. So you know how we always talk about leaky gut, and leaky gut is basically more bad bacteria than good bacteria, and we're always trying to balance this, usually with more good bacteria than bad bacteria. When you eat a lot of sugar, over consumption of sugar each day, each week. Wow, my cat is just on the roll here. Sorry. Um, there we go. Okay. Um, where was I? Oh, and so when we eat a lot of sugar, it helps the bad bacteria grow. It's like food for bad bacteria, and it just eats and eats and eats the sugar, and the bad bacteria grows and grows and grows. So when that happens, we can develop more of a leaky gut because now we have more bad bacteria than good bacteria, and all equaling to inflammation, holes in the gut. I think I just froze. Did I just freeze?
Let me see here.
No,
Nope, you're
I think I'm
moving.
good.
You're good.
Okay, good. Um, so even though it's not necessarily gluten, grains, dairy that you're eating, the sugar can be causing the symptoms in your body and making your leaky gut worse in your autoimmune disease and flaring up your autoimmune symptoms. So this is the importance of our talk today and why it is so important to keep that sugar in you, to go on a low carb diet. We are not telling you to go keto. We want you to do what's best for you and what is better for your body to keep in balance. And that's being mindful and aware of your symptoms in your body and what it feels like when you eat certain ingredients.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add too, like one of the things I think of as well as a symptom of, consuming too many sources of sugar would be brain fog,
Yeah.
and fatigue, having kind of getting like almost like a boost of energy, but then having a crash. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're feeling that during the day where you're like, oh, I feel great for a little bit after eating lunch, and then, oh my goodness, I need to have a nap. That could possibly be a sign that you had, too many sources of sugar or carbohydrate in that meal, and it's affecting you that way. And or feeling really bloated and uncomfortable after eating can also be a sign that you have an imbalance happening in your gut, where, like Casey was saying, when you are having like lots of refined carbs or sugars or other sources of refined carbohydrates, the bad bacteria love to feed on it. And when bad bacteria are feeding on that type of food, you're going to get gas and bloating and discomfort because
Mm-hmm.
that bacteria, as it's eating those sources of sugar and carbohydrates, it's causing gas. It's
Yeah.
releasing gases into our system.
Yeah.
So that's just something to look out for as well.
I would also say, and especially for your crowd, Jessica, that does have an autoimmune form of arthritis, is joint pain. I do not have arthritis, anything close to it, but when I eat too much sugar, my knuckles and my fingers hurt. Like to go like this hurts me. And right immediately there, I know that I'm inflamed and I need to cut down on my sugar. And sometimes it can be dairy for me too. I'm already gluten free, so that's out the window. Um, And that's a really good way for me to know that I need to cut down my root vegetables. I need to take care of myself just a little extra this week. So there's some key symptoms that will show up in you and not other people, but to be aware of those and to know where it's coming from is important.
Absolutely.
Headaches
Absolutely.
would be another one. I usually get a headache too if I've overconsumed my sugar intake for sure. And that can come from dehydration, from too much sugar. That can come from the sugar in general, um, the lack of sleep that you're losing. God, my cats are going crazy today, um, etc. So I digress from that.
No, that's a great, those are great examples, because I think a lot of times people, they don't think to pay attention to some of those symptoms and to see what they mean. And
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this a long time ago too in one of our lives about mindfulness and just being, paying attention to the signals that our body is giving us.
Yeah, exactly. One little story I wanted to bring up today was so I've been seeing a doctor for my autoimmune health, and she's been helping me more than just the diet side of things. And we started talking about sugar intake. And I look back and I've always said, like, the next day after eating a lot of sugar, like, wow, I have a sugar hangover today. I feel hungover. I feel lethargic. I feel brain fog. I feel hungover. And I always called those sugar hangovers. So I knew my limit. I knew that I couldn't have sugar, after 8 p.m., things like that. And she's like, well, you're very toxic inside, and this um contributes to you having a 1 gallon tank to a 12-gallon tank. So let me go into that a little bit. Is She was stating that I have a 1 gallon tank of what my body can handle for sugar and carbohydrates. Normal and healthy people have about a 12-gallon tank. So if you eat a piece of chocolate cake, your body is going to produce some insulin. It's going to absorb it. It's going to handle it effectively and then get rid of it or use it as needed. Mine does that on a very, very limited amount. And so going down to a lower carbohydrate diet, getting the toxins all swept out and eliminated from you, can help bring that gallon tank back up to a 12-gallon tank. So in hindsight, I was right with the sugar hangovers. My body is not producing or eliminating using sugar like it should be. And so if you're starting to feel this way, take note that your body may not have the tank that it needs to process sugar the right way. And to help that, we need to eat a healthier diet. I would suggest the autoimmune protocol. If you have an autoimmune disease, I would do a lower carbohydrate diet. And then start with getting rid of the toxins in you, because that's what's clogging up that 12-gallon tank. And I know I'm saying this like it sounds easy. Oh, that's why we are here, because it is not easy, and we are here to support you and guide you and educate you through the process. So listen to your body is kind of what I'm saying, and there's a reason for what you're feeling.
Absolutely. No, that's a great analogy, Casey. I love that. It makes me actually think back into my earlier years, even in my 20s, my university years. You go out drinking, and
Mm,
I could never drink those sweet drinks. I would always say
yeah.
if I had any of those the next day, I would call it the booze hangover and the sugar hangover.
Mhm.
Because back then, if I just had, let's say, beer for the evening, I wouldn't have the same type of hangover the next day. Not saying this is a good idea, but I was like 21 at the time. It was a long time ago. And I'm sure most of us can relate to that, our university years and staying up drinking too much and eating, nachos at midnight and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, that extra hangover from the sugar, it just brought it up a whole other awful notch. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of sugar and how it like kind of processes itself in the body. And feel free to interject anytime you want, Casey, with
Mhm.
this. So when we ingest sugar in its forms. So obviously it's a little bit different if we're having like a whole piece of fruit versus if we're having a sugar cube or something like a piece of cake. So sugar actually it creates a spike in insulin in our bodies. So the insulin travels to the liver and the muscle cells, telling them to take glucose from the bloodstream and store it. So basically, insulin's job is to get rid of that sugar in the blood. It's to level it out. So we don't take all of it out, but it's going to be like, okay, we're not using this, so we're going to take the rest and we're going to store it.
Mm-hmm.
So as insulin levels increase, our blood sugar levels come down because the insulin is working to get rid of the excess blood sugar. So at a certain point, the brain, which needs glucose to function, calls for more glucose because the brain loves glucose. So if it doesn't get the glucose it wants, it tunes out so we can get mental fatigue. And then we crave more sugar. So we can also experience something called hypoglycemia. So having a low blood sugar rating. So if this cycle doesn't stop and we keep eating sugar, our insulin keeps pumping, and this can lead to diabetes overall. So we obviously don't want that. It's basically when our poor pancreas gets tired of producing insulin, our body becomes insensitive to insulin because it's like, well, I tried to help you by giving you all this insulin, but you keep bombarding me with all the sugar, and now I just don't even know what to do with it anymore. And so eventually our body's just like, well, you're not listening to me. So the insulin's just not working anymore because it's like, I gave the insulin, you didn't listen. That's at least how I look at it. It's like, we're not paying attention, and our body is just like, okay, well, I guess producing extra insulin's not helping because I keep having all the sugar coming into the bloodstream, and like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So excess insulin can actually increase the thickness of the arterial walls, making them less elastic and narrow, which can drive our blood pressure up and our heart rate. So this is so important because a lot of people, and I know I was taught, that fat is bad for us, especially saturated forms of fat. That's why we had margarine instead of butter in the 90s, and I think in the 80s. And the whole low fat craze is like, oh, fat is terrible. It's actually sugar that is creating hardening of the arteries and high cholesterol. So eating foods with cholesterol in them is not creating high cholesterol. Eating tons of refined carbohydrates is what is causing the problem.
Yes. And we don't get that information from the Netflix documentaries that are on there about food right now because and I say this just from personal experience of watching these Netflix documentaries thinking I'm going to learn something. And it is basically they're still teaching the 90s form of fat causes diabetes, fat causes increased cholesterol, fat causes this, and basically go to a plant-based low-fat diet. When in reality, there are so many studies out there that is just telling you it's not the fat when you eat a good quality fat. It is the increase in sugar that we've been eating in America and Northern America, basically, that is causing all of these issues. So for some people, it is still a new way of thinking. For others, like this is common sense, right? But do your own research on it, but also do your own experiment on it. Try going to a lower carb diet if you feel compelled to, and see the changes or results that could happen. And, if you want to do your own research on doing a low fat diet and going more plant-based or don't lower your sugars at all and see the results of that, do it. But you're your own, what's the word? Advocate here. So, I don't know. I don't know what else more to say about that, but sugar is the devil in our minds, and fat can be very healthy for you. And let's do a live on fats, Jessica, because I feel like that's really,
Fat has been getting a bad rap for way too long.
Right, exactly.
Fat is our friend. Our fat is our friend.
I wanted to mention something also when you were talking about, the body increases insulin and then it calls for more and then we produce more insulin. Is on another side of things, we're also making the body more addicted to sugar when we have sugar. So it's just in our, I want to say it's like human nature to, when we have sugar, it lights up the brain and then it wants more sugar. And it's this hamster wheel, right? Just like Jessica was saying, we eat sugar, the insulin produces, we eat sugar, and insulin produces. It's also, we eat sugar, the brain wants sugar. We eat sugar, the brain wants sugar. And it's this hamster wheel that keeps going around. And it's because we get a dopamine boost when we eat sugar. We are always, always, always looking for a dopamine boost, just being a human being. And whether that dopamine boost is sugar, or it's binge watching Netflix, it's sex, porn, cards, gambling,
Shopping.
shopping, scrolling on social media. There are so many different dopamine boosts that we're just looking for as being a human being, and sugar is one of those top ones. And studies have shown that sugar lights up the brain just as heroin would if you injected that inside of you. Like, that's how powerful it is. So it's this hamster wheel we keep doing, and we need to be aware of that to cut the process. A lot of us, and I would say over half of us that are watching this live, are addicted to sugar. It is a real thing, and being aware of it is the first step to breaking that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's and you can do a little experiment about this too, because I know that for me, let's say it's like Halloween comes around. I don't normally
Mhm.
eat candy. It's not really my thing. But I might have a little bit. Let's say it's Halloween, and when I used to work in an office, there'd always be someone bringing candy around at Halloween. And if I had a couple pieces, and like normally, and like I said, it doesn't really interest me. But then I'd have it, and then all of a sudden, I'd be like, 15 minutes later, I'd be like, man, I could really use another jujube.
Yep.
Like, when have I ever, like, I can't remember the last time I liked eating jujubes. You know what I mean? Like, and it makes you want more. It just, that physiological process that happens in our body. But the good news is that you can break that cycle, and
Yeah.
it doesn't take as long as you think it would. So
Yeah.
there is
Exactly.
hope. Trust me.
Exactly.
So I know
So
sorry, go
go ahead.
ahead, Casey.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know we're kind of getting tight on time because
We are.
this is such a topic we're passionate about. So we are going to just go through some of the different effects that sugar can have on our bodies, so you can kind of have an idea, and also just to give you a quick little rundown on some sneaky sources of sugar and ways to cut back so that you're not craving it so much. So I'm just going to list off some of the possible effects of ingesting too much sugar. So like we were talking about before with the whole leaky gut and having an imbalance of bad bacteria over good bacteria, this can cause an acidic digestive tract. So that's where you get candida overgrowth or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth when you have that imbalance of unhealthy bacteria and fungus over the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So having arthritis pains, hemorrhoids, increased cholesterol, having tooth decay, inhibiting the absorption of calcium and magnesium. So you might be low on those minerals. Obesity, cataracts, depression. Like we were saying before, it can be intoxicating like alcohol. So that whole addiction effect. Kidney stones, gout. It can dehydrate newborns. So obviously, hopefully you're not feeding your newborn babies anything with a bunch of sugar in it, just to be aware of that. Very detrimental to the health and very potentially very dangerous. Lung cancers, slow adrenal gland function, asthma, constipation, cell death. So those are just a list of some of the scary things that can happen with too much sugar.
Yeah, I want to highlight the depression one just because it's near and dear to my heart. Mental health, sugar and mental health kind of go hand in hand, especially for depression and anxiety. Too much sugar often causes mood disorders, depression, and anxiety. So if you are one of those people that struggle with depression and anxiety, like myself, try going more lower carbohydrate, lower sugar diet and see how that impacts you. Because I can eat a lot of sugar and the next day I will have more anxiety, I will have more depression, more sad like moods, and unstable moods in general. So do a little research and experiment on that if you struggle with depression and anxiety.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Casey, because it's very similar to how you feel hungover,
Hmm.
that after effect of alcohol, and alcohol is sugar. So it's the same process. It's, one of the same reasons why you feel sad and anxious and blah when you're hungover. Same thing with
Yep,
sugar. Yeah.
exactly.
And Casey,
So
did you want to run through some of the sneaky sugar sources out there?
yeah, definitely. Matcha powder. Jessica and I were talking about this, and some Starbucks or coffee shops will have a pre-mixed matcha powder, and it does have sugar in it to make it less bitter and more tasty and all of the things. So make sure to ask beforehand what's in that matcha powder, and if you're getting it from the store, look at the ingredient label.
Yes.
Salad dressings and marinades. These are top contenders to sneak sugars into. You would think that it's just oils and vinegars and lemons and spices and things like that. It is actually a lot of corn syrup or other forms of sugar, maltodextrin, things like that. Spices and seasonings. Oftentimes there are sugar in there, like barbecue rubs do have a lot of sugar in there, and some other things. Ketchup and barbecue sauces. There are low sugar or no sugar forms of these. Just make sure to look at the ingredient label. I would always recommend just making your own though. Non-dairy milks. So coconut milks, almond milks, sneak sugars into some of those brands, not all of them. So again, check your ingredient labels. Keto products. So these are artificial sugar sweeteners, which some of them like sucralose, aspartame, which are the sweet and lows, and I forgot what the other one's called. I haven't had these in a long time, but
Aspartame and yeah, sucralose are like the two most common, really nasty ones.
yeah. So there's ones in the yellow packets and the pink packets that are on the tables, and these trick the body like there is actual sugar coming, and that calls the body to produce insulin. So even though the body doesn't need insulin to break down and get rid of these artificial sugars, the insulin is still being produced and it's just circulating in the bloodstream now, which is not good for the body if the insulin's not doing its job. So be careful of that. And then protein bars are often packed with sugar. The Cliff bars for kids, the Kind bars, the Perfect bars, things like this. There's a lot of sugar in them, so just be aware. Make your own. Check the ingredient label. Um, Teas, so like going to a coffee shop or buying it out of the grocery store. There are a lot of sugar in these to make it taste good and not as bitter as they think it is. Dried fruits. So oftentimes it's not just dried fruit, it is dried fruit plus sugar. So things like craisins and raisins and dried pineapple, dried coconut, dried bananas. There's oftentimes unsweetened versions of these, which is what I would look for if I were you. But most of them are sweetened and they taste oh so good, but it's because they are sweetened. And
Yes.
then fruit juices. So it's not just orange juice sometimes, it's not just cranberry juice that's squeezed into a bottle. Some are, so please look for those. But most or half of them are fruit juices with sugar in there. So be mindful of that.
Absolutely. And so I guess the other big thing we just wanted to cover quickly is how to cut back on sugar and how to reduce your cravings for sugar. Because Obviously, if you haven't caught what we've been drilling home for this last half an hour, is about how detrimental sugar can be to our health. So, some of the different ways that you can cut back on sugar and reduce your cravings is intermittent fasting. So, having a break, like I even say, like the easiest way to do some intermittent fasting is to take 12 hours between the time you eat dinner till the time you eat breakfast the next morning at a minimum. Just give your body 12 hours to do what it needs to do to rest and repair, and clean out all the excess stuff that's in the blood, and allow your body to do what it naturally does. Give your body that break. Cutting back on sugar, cutting it out and reducing it, and replacing that with some more fat and protein, like good quality sources of good fats and good proteins.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you check your ingredient labels for sugars. Lots of times there's different names for it. Fructose is one, corn syrup, of course, is one. Those are things to look for. Even if it says organic raw cane sugar, it's still sugar. Cane sugar is white sugar. So read the labels, especially if there is sugar or form of sugar in the first 5 ingredients. You want to stay clear of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you also want to cut back on the artificial sugars as well. So like Casey was saying, it still can trick our body to produce insulin. So things like aspartame, things like sucralose, diet sodas, for example, they contain
Mm-hmm.
those things.
Yep.
And getting exercise keeps our blood sugar stable. And it also helps reduce our cravings just naturally as well. And making sure that you're hydrated. Are you drinking plenty of water? Are you getting enough? Because often, if you are dehydrated, you're going to crave more sugar. So, being aware of those things. And Casey, did you want to add to any of those? I know you know more about intermittent fasting than I do.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the intermittent fasting just because I have found so much relief from the intermittent fasting, even though I don't practice it in a structured way. I still do a minimum of 12 hours. But when I first was doing it, it's amazing the appetite control that I had, because before intermittent fasting, I would graze all day. I was hungry every 2 hours. My blood sugar was probably like this throughout the day. Gosh knows my moods were like this throughout the day. I always craved sugar, so I always had that with every meal. And when I started intermittent fasting, probably maybe like 4 weeks into it, I had regulated moods. I had regulated appetite control. I wasn't starving in the morning or at night. And I could not think about my next meal, which was the most reviving thing for me, I think, is to not always think about food like I was before. So if anybody has questions about intermittent fasting or skeptical or thinking about it, comment below, DM us. We'll never tell you to do it, but we can definitely give you the pros and cons of it, and you can decide if it is best for you, because it's not best for everybody. Everybody is different and has different biochemistry. So we want to make sure that it's safe and acceptable for you.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of information, you guys. If you have any questions, definitely comment on this video. We'd be happy to reach out to you, or send us a message as well. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some light bulb moments. And if you did, let us know what they are. We'd be curious.
Yeah, definitely. Like and share this video. We'll be back on Thursday, and we are talking about some foods that make your autoimmune condition worse. So feel free, or please come to the next live on Thursday to listen more about that. And we will talk to you then.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Bye.